Good morning. I hope that you can hear me. So I will share with you my screen for the beginning. Hope you can see it. Just a second. Okay, I hope that the presentation is now for you available. So thank you for the introduction. So as you already know it, I'm a historian, PhD. I'm very happy that I can be here today with you. It's a pleasure to be able to share some results of my latest research here today with you. So to begin with, as a historian, I researched the history of Poland in the 19th and 20th centuries. But being a historian dealing only with the history of Poland means that the results of the research are interesting only to a small audience, mainly Polish audience, Polish-speaking audience. So my idea is to be open to international and interdisciplinary cooperation, like our meeting today. And to do it, I rather study history of Poland seen from outside. So my PhD thesis concerned the Polish-Danish relations in the 19th century. As an example, I can share with you that it was absolutely interesting to read the source archive material from 19th century that testified the culture shock experienced by a Dane who came to Poland for the very first time in the end of the 19th century. So it is not strictly a history of Poland, in fact, rather the culture shock and meeting of two cultures. So in this way, I also study stereotypes and mutual perceptions. I'm a historian, but also considering my job profile, I'm a museologist. I have worked in museums, and while working now at university, I also constantly collaborate with museums. As a museologist, I also believe that this is the best way to study the history of your own nation in contact with the others. So in 2017, for example, I was the curator of the exhibition entitled Poles in the Canadian Mosaic, 150 Years of History. This exhibition was presented on two continents, I mean here in Poland, but also in Canada for more than 1 year. As an academic teacher, I teach my students here at the University of Gdańsk many subjects in the field of museology. I attach particular importance to the subject of museum education. My goal is to train museum educators who understand the idea of the inclusive museum. So I would like to emphasize that I combine this technique of a historian and a museologist. And it is also connected with my research grant. Here, for example, on the PowerPoint presentation, you can see the title of the research grant from our Polish National Science Center in Krakow. In 2019, I completed a research grant about a Polish immigration in Norway and Sweden in their museums. So I took another look at how Polish history is perceived outside Poland. So this time I checked how Scandinavian curators in museums present immigrants from Poland without us, with our opinions, how it is done simply in Sweden and Norway. Being a historian museologist made me involved not only in researching the past, but also in vividly reacting to the present, thanks to being a museologist. So, for example, last year, I prepared a paper analyzing how Polish museums behaved during the pandemic. There is a method of reacting quickly to the events taking place, by creating a museum collection or exhibition, such, let's call it live documenting of events. It's called rapid response collecting. And here on the PowerPoint presentation, you can see the title of the whole paper article. I studied in this paper which Polish museums used this method during the pandemic. Rapid response collecting is important in a social context because it usually means participation of local community in creating a collection documenting local life in some kind of hard times, for example, pandemic times. So today I'm waiting also for the very last speech where Mary Virgilia will also present the results of pandemic research. I hope we can find something in common in our findings about pandemia. However, I believe that the most fascinating issue in the field of museology are migration museums. First of all, let me explain very briefly the difference between two phenomena: migration museums and migration in different museums. It is slightly different things. The narrative of migration and activities for migrants, activities with migrants, are undertaken in many different types of museums: art museums, city museums, local museums, and many others. So this is what I called migration in different museums. As you can see in the presentation slide, researchers have already noticed and analyzed the social role of museums as contact zones, as the place of the contact between the newcomers and the host societies. I have selected only a few titles to draw your attention to this phenomenon. Especially interesting is the last book about museums as places of intercultural dialogue. However, I noticed a definite lack. There are no research on typical migration museums. What do I understand by migration museums? All over the world, there are museums entirely dedicated to migration. They're a reflection of the migration processes that took place from the 19th century until now. As you can see on the PowerPoint presentation, just a few examples. So reflecting the history of migration, that is why there are many museums in Europe telling about the emigration from Europe to United States, to America in the 19th and 20th centuries, like Emigration Museum in Gdynia, Poland. On the other hand, in the United States or Canada, there are museums talking about the same process, the process of immigration to these countries. However, in the 20th and 21st century, so nowadays, many newcomers, new immigrants came to Europe. So this is why, for example, in Denmark, the new immigration museums have been created. And you can see here Danish Immigration Museum in Farum, close to Copenhagen in Denmark. I can also list many other types of migration museums, such as open air migration museum or museum dedicated to specific event. Here, for example, you can see the example of the Partition Museum in India, telling the story of division of British India in 1937, which caused mass migration between India and Pakistan, millions of people. Fascinating phenomenon are also small museums founded all over the world by local communities. So you may ask whether the study of migration museum, which is my field of study, is just a description of an institution or real study of society. Well, on the basis of my research, of my studies, I'm absolutely convinced that migration museums are museums in a lively dialogue with the present. Today, we do not have time to discuss it in details, but it should be emphasized that migration museums not only prepare exhibitions, but most of all conduct participation projects and inclusive education for both migrants and host societies. Migration museums also form a global network. They are suitable partners for geopolitical researchers, and this applies both to the historical aspects of migrations as well as studies of refugees and contemporary geopolitical situation. In this context, for example, now, in this month, in these weeks, I'm currently observing the attitude of our Polish museums here towards the war refugees from Ukraine. Very interesting topic, and I can tell you that museums are active in being open and welcome for the refugees, preparing, for example, open exhibitions, tickets for free for Ukrainian refugees, special animation for children in Ukrainian language to make possible in this time for parents, for mothers to look for a job, and many others. Also, Polish museologists offer some job position for Ukrainian museologists and so on. So a great solidarity in the case of museums. And I can say that many Polish museums in some way became migration museums nowadays, being so open for Ukrainian refugees. Finally, I would like to emphasize that migration museums are part of the public history. By this expression, public history, we mean history taught outside school and outside university. So at a time when scientists forecast that various types of migrations, climate migrations, war refugees, and so on, will be the greatest, one of the greatest challenges facing humanity, it is worth emphasizing that migration museums are places where people, very different people outside schools, can acquire good quality knowledge about migration. And it was planned to be the end of my presentation, but if I can react very now alive to what just the previous speaker said, I would like to add now that migration museums are also very much connected with seaside, with the port cities. I also study a lot migration museums in port cities in the old migration infrastructure. If I can maybe came back to one of this previous slide. For example, here what you can see, a migration museum in Gdynia, Ellis Island National Museum of Immigration in New York, in Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21. All of them, all that three, just examples, are located in a very, the heart of the ports, of the harbors, on the real coast. Pier 21 is simply the name of the pier in the port when where ocean liners used to stop to take the migrants. Why I'm telling that in the connection with the previous speaker? Because studying migration museums in the former port infrastructure in these port cities, it is also about tourist attractions, creating new places for tourists and culture heritage. For example, Immigration Museum in Gdynia is quite new institution, open in 2015, in the real functioning port, which up to that moment was just simply a port, so just the industry area. And opening museum in port was a move to ask to invite tourists and a local community to be more active in this part of the city. So I don't want to take more time that it was planned, but I'm also very open to discuss this aspect of potential of old former migration infrastructure in the port cities as a tourist attraction, important for the local community, which I believe can be something in common for our two field of studies. So going to the end, I would just like to add that this year I prepared 2 articles in English about migration museums and their involvement in contemporary migrations and also refugees crisis. They are now in the process of printing, so not ready yet, but I hope will be ready this year. So I will be more than happy to share it with you if you will be interested. Well, so that's all for the 10-minute speech. I hope that I didn't take more time. Thank you for your attention, and I'm very open to discuss migration museums and a social and tourist role of museums in general. Thank you.